I never imagined my life would change on a Tuesday morning. I was a sergeant stationed at Fort Grayson, a mid-sized military base tucked into the forests of northern Georgia. Routine was everything in my world. Wake up at 0500, hit PT, check the perimeter, and go through the motions. But that morning, something felt off. The radio crackled with chatter from the guard towers, more panicked than usual. I frowned, running a hand through my short-cropped hair as I glanced at the sunrise breaking over the tree line. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, curling over the treetops like fingers clawing at the sky. "Sergeant, you hearing this?" Private Daniels, barely 20, asked as he jogged up next to me during morning formation. His voice had that tremble that comes from too many late-night horror movies and not enough real danger. I shook my head. "Calm down, Daniels. Looks like a brush fire or a training accident. Command will have it under control." But then, the first scream cut through the air, a raw, guttural sound that didn't belong to any human I knew. Not one soldier in formation moved too quickly. We all froze, the tension winding tighter with each passing second. "Move! Move! Move!" yelled Lieutenant Harper over the radio, his voice sharp. I sprinted toward the sound with Daniels trailing, heart hammering against my chest. The sight I encountered burned into my mind. A patrol team had cornered a civilian, or what used to be a civilian, in the supply yard. His skin was pallid, gray, and mottled. His eyes, wide and unseeing, reflected pure malice. He lunged at them with unnatural speed. I opened fire. My M4 spit rounds in rapid succession, but the thing didn't go down easily. The bullets tore through flesh, but its movements were wrong, jerky yet persistent. It clawed at one of my men, dragging him down before the others could react. The sounds, screams, thuds, and tearing filled the crisp morning air. Daniels vomited behind a stack of crates. Sergeant, what is that?" I felt my stomach knot. "I don't know, but stay close. Keep your head down." The alarms sounded across the base, red lights flashing in the guard towers. A state of emergency. Lockdown procedures engaged. By the time I made it to the barracks, every unit was scrambling, weapons drawn, shouting orders into the chaos. I found Captain Monroe in the command center, gripping the console like it was the last lifeline left in the world. His face was pale, hands trembling slightly. "Sergeant, you saw it?" he asked, voice low. "It's spreading faster than we thought. It started in Atlanta. Now it's here." I nodded, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. "Sir, are we safe here?" Monroe shook his head. "Safe? No, not anymore. Fort Grayson is cut off. The perimeter is holding for now, but they're everywhere. We need a plan to contain it or survive until reinforcements." That night, we barricaded the gates with whatever heavy equipment we could find: tanks, trucks, and sandbags. Soldiers moved silently, shadows under flickering floodlights. The sounds outside were constant: groans, banging, the sickening drag of bodies. Even from a distance, it was relentless. I found a moment to myself in the bunk room, staring at my rifle like it was an extension of my own body. Memories of my family flickered my little sister's laugh, my mother's steady hands, and I felt a pang of guilt. Could I survive this? Would I? The first wave hit around midnight. I had my squad ready along the eastern perimeter, firing in bursts whenever the creatures appeared. They weren't intelligent. They didn't hesitate or strategize. But their numbers seemed infinite, a tide of flesh and rage that pressed against our defenses. Private Daniels, shaking like a leaf, yelled over the gunfire, "Sergeant, how are we still alive?" I didn't answer. Survival wasn't about hope. It was about action. I pulled him down as another one lunged past the sandbags, bullets tearing through it midair. We stayed low, heartbeats echoing in our helmets, until the wave dissipated. When dawn came, it revealed a scene of devastation. Bodies littered the outer fields. Our defenses had held, but at a cost. Several soldiers were down, some missing. I wiped the sweat and blood from my face and looked around at the surviving men and women. Fear, exhaustion, determination, it was all there. And I realized something chilling. This wasn't just an outbreak. This was a war. And we were standing in the middle of the battlefield. For the next few days, the base became a strange, suspended world. The normal rhythm of military life, PT, drills, chow, was replaced with patrols, barricades, and the ever-present hum of fear. We had enough supplies to last a week if rationed carefully. MREs, water, ammo. But the real challenge wasn't the lack of food or bullets. It was the uncertainty. How many of them were out there? How fast were they multiplying? I was assigned the eastern perimeter again, where the first wave had hit. Daniels and I took shifts, spotting the tree line. He kept asking questions I couldn't answer. "Sergeant, why aren't they stopping? I mean, don't they get tired?" I gritted my teeth. "I don't know, and we don't get to find out." During the daytime, the moans outside seemed almost calm. Quiet, even. Too quiet. The dead, or whatever, they were moved like predators in the shadows, always just beyond our line of sight. At night, it became a symphony of terror. One night, the groaning was closer than I expected. I looked over the sandbag barricade and saw the silhouettes of 3 crawling over each other, reaching for the lights. The first casualty that week wasn't killed by the infected, but by fear and panic. Sergeant Mills had snapped while on guard duty. He fired indiscriminately into the darkness, screaming that we were all doomed. Captain Monroe had to calm him down physically, dragging him back to the command center. That was when I realized that the dead weren't the only enemy. Our minds were turning against us. In the mess hall, the atmosphere was tense, silent, except for the scraping of spoons against tin trays. Soldiers exchanged glances, but no one spoke much. Everyone was calculating, wondering how long the base could hold. I sat across from Daniels, who stared at his meal like it was poison. "Sergeant, do you think we'll survive this?" I didn't answer at first. I wanted to tell him the truth, that maybe survival was a matter of luck, not skill, but he needed hope, even if it was fragile. "We hold the line. That's all we can do," I said finally. Days blurred into nights, and nights into constant vigilance. Then came the breach. It was early morning, the sun barely above the horizon. I had been scanning the tree line with a pair of binoculars when I noticed movement too fast, too coordinated for just a few infected. My stomach dropped. "Daniels, get the squad!" I yelled. By the time the team reached the eastern gate, the breach had already begun. The creatures weren't just wandering, they were organized in some horrifying way I couldn't understand. One of our gates had been clawed open. The infected poured in like water through a broken dam. I opened fire, feeling my training kick in, but this time the numbers were overwhelming. Every time one went down, 2 more surged forward. Private Daniels screamed as a creature lunged at him. I shot it in the head, but another was right behind it. Fall back, I ordered. We retreated to the barracks, locking doors and reinforcing windows. Our defensive plan was crumbling. The captain radioed me from the command center. "All units, regroup at the central armory, supplies and weapons." I grabbed Daniels and ran through the maze of hallways, firing at the ones that slipped past. Sweat burned my eyes. My heart felt like it would explode. When we finally reached the armory, The sight froze me. Half the soldiers were dead, their bodies torn, their weapons scattered. The survivors huddled behind overturned tables, wide-eyed and shaking. Captain Monroe was there, shouting orders like a man clinging to sanity. "Barricade! Hold this position! If we fall here, we lose the base!" Hours passed like this. The infected battered the armory doors, throwing their weight against reinforced steel, screaming their monstrous cries. Each thud made my teeth rattle. Every groan made me grit my teeth. During a lull, I found Daniels crouched in a corner, shaking. "Sergeant, why is this happening? Why won't they die?" I knelt beside him. "Because this isn't about dying. It's about surviving. And right now, that's all that matters." By evening, we had a plan. We couldn't hold the armory forever. Supplies were limited, and the breach would eventually overwhelm us. I suggested an offensive, taking out a nearby group of infected with controlled charges and clearing part of the perimeter. Monroe hesitated, but agreed. The operation was brutal. We lost 2 more soldiers, and Daniels nearly got dragged into the fray. But by the end, we had created a small safe zone in the mess hall and part of the barracks. It was temporary, but it gave us breathing room. That night, as I lay awake listening to the faint scraping and moaning from outside, I realized something terrifying. The base wasn't just under siege from the infected. The real test was whether we could survive ourselves, our fear, our doubts, and the crushing weight of isolation. By the 4th day of the siege, Fort Grayson felt less like a military base and more like a tomb. The sounds outside were constant, a gnawing, scraping, moaning chorus that rattled our nerves. Inside, the living were just as dangerous. Fear has a way of twisting people, of making them act in ways they'd never imagine. I was on watch at the mess hall barricade when Daniel stumbled over, clutching a makeshift bandage around a deep cut on his forearm. "Sergeant, I tried to help, but it got me," he said, voice trembling. I examined the wound. It was deep but clean, no signs of infection yet. Still, I knew we couldn't take chances. If this thing had even the slightest chance of infection, he was a ticking time bomb. "Stay calm. We'll patch you up properly. You'll be fine," I reassured him, though inside I questioned whether that was true. We patched him as best we could, but the real challenge was morale. Soldiers whispered in corners, questioning whether reinforcements would ever arrive, whether the base could hold, whether they themselves could survive. Arguments broke out over trivial matters, rationing, who got the best sleeping spots, but they were symptoms of a deeper anxiety, the fear that none of us would make it through the night. I called a meeting in the command center. Monroe, exhausted but still sharp, addressed us. "We're holding, but we're running out of supplies," he said. "We can't just sit here. We need a plan to secure more food and ammo. We also need to reinforce the perimeter. I don't care what it takes." I volunteered to lead a small team outside the base. It was suicide, yes, but someone had to scout for supplies. Daniels insisted on going, despite my protests. "I'm not staying here to die doing nothing," he said, fists clenched. That night, we moved out in silence, creeping along the edges of the forest. The moon was a thin sliver in the sky, barely lighting the ground ahead. Every sound made me freeze. A branch snapping, leaves rustling, even the wind. We found an abandoned supply depot a few miles from the base. The place had been looted, but we managed to scavenge a few crates of food, water, and ammunition. As we were about to leave, I saw movement something faster than the shambling infected we'd encountered. "Hold," I whispered. A soldier from another unit, Private Reyes, emerged from the shadows, breathing hard, eyes wide with panic. "They're everywhere, running toward the base. You have to warn them." Before I could respond, a wave of infected appeared, faster than anything I'd seen. They didn't stumble, they sprinted, coordinated in a terrifying, almost human-like way. I opened fire, taking down a few, but more kept coming. Daniels grabbed my arm. "We can't outrun them." I made a split-second decision. Head into the depot. Barricade the doors. We can fight them off from here. We barely got the doors closed before the infected pounded against them. The sound of wood splintering and metal bending was deafening. Bullets tore through some, but they kept coming. Relentless. Hours later, we had cleared the immediate threat, but it was a hollow victory. We were trapped inside the depot, separated from the base. I radioed Monroe. "Command, this is Sergeant Whitman. We've secured some supplies, but we're pinned in. Need extraction." Static. Then a faint, distorted voice. "Hold. Perimeter. Reinforcements." The signal cut off. My stomach sank. Communication with the base was unreliable, at best. We spent the night in the depot, catching what little sleep we could. Daniel sat against a crate, staring at the floor. "Sergeant, I don't think anyone's coming." I wanted to reassure him, but I couldn't lie. "We'll survive. We have to." By dawn, we made our way back to the base, carrying the supplies like a lifeline. The scene inside the armory had changed. Some soldiers had snapped completely, firing recklessly, screaming at shadows. Others were too terrified to move. Monroe met us at the entrance, face ashen. "Report," he said. I told him everything. He nodded grimly. "Good work, Sergeant. But we have bigger problems. The perimeter on the east side, it's been breached. And I've received reports, internal sabotage. Someone's been letting them in." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Internal sabotage? A traitor in our midst? Feeding the dead? Risking us all? We began investigating immediately, watching each other with suspicion. Trust was fragile. Every glance, every word was weighed carefully. Even Daniels, usually dependable, flinched when a soldier passed him too closely. That night, I patrolled the armory perimeter alone. The moonlight revealed movement-silent figures slipping past our outer barricades. My heart raced as I realized the unthinkable. The breach wasn't just about weakness in our defenses. Someone was helping them. By the time I returned to the mess hall, Monroe was waiting. "We need to find the traitor." The traitor wasn't obvious at first. Everyone was jumpy, glancing over their shoulders, jumping at every shadow. We set watches and checkpoints, searched quarters, and interrogated anyone behaving oddly. But the deeper I looked, the more I realized fear itself was as dangerous as the dead outside. It started with small things: ammo caches gone missing, doors unlocked, guard rotations off by minutes. Each mistake seemed minor, but together they spelled disaster. I confronted Private Reyes, the soldier who had panicked with us at the depot. He shook his head vehemently. "Sergeant, I didn't do anything, I swear." I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't, not anymore. Trust was a liability, and we didn't have that luxury. By nightfall, the base was quiet in a way that felt wrong. I patrolled the perimeter with Daniels, rifle ready, senses stretched to their breaking point. The moans outside were muted, almost like the dead were waiting, watching. Then it happened. The eastern gate, the one we had reinforced after the first wave, exploded inward, not with fire or explosives, but mechanically. Heavy equipment had been tampered with from the inside. A dozen infected surged through the breach. We opened fire immediately, but the attackers were relentless. Some of our men went down in seconds. Daniels and I held our ground, retreating strategically to the mess hall. Inside, Chaos erupted. Soldiers screamed, fired indiscriminately, and some froze in panic. Monroe barked orders, trying to regroup survivors. I noticed a shadow slipping away from the fight, not one of the infected, but a human figure. Someone had let them in. "Daniels, follow me!" I shouted. We pursued, moving through darkened hallways, the sounds of death echoing behind us. The figure darted through the supply corridor, and I tackled him against the wall. It was Lieutenant Harper. My stomach sank. "What the hell, Harper?" I shouted, pressing my rifle against his chest. He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You don't understand. This is the evolution. You think you're surviving, but you're just delaying the inevitable." I froze. "Evolution? What are you talking about?" Harper's eyes were wild, almost fanatic. "They're changing, improving. The base, the soldiers, everything. I'm helping them. You can't stop it. You're weak. You're holding humanity back." Before I could respond, he kicked me off and disappeared into a side corridor. Daniels grabbed my arm. "Sergeant, we need to get back. They're everywhere." We retreated to the mess hall, barricading the doors as infected pressed against the walls. Monroe was there, trying to organize a counterattack. "We've got to isolate that section of the base," he said, voice tense. "Harper's compromised more than just the gates. He's been feeding them intelligence, helping them adapt." I realized, with a sickening clarity, that survival wasn't just about bullets or barricades. It was about outthinking both the dead and the living. Harper had become a vector not infected, but worse, a guide for the infected, leading them where we were vulnerable. By dawn, the battle lines had shifted. The base had lost several key sections. Barracks were overrun, the armory was compromised, and our supply of ammunition was dangerously low. Daniels and I moved through the wreckage, patching wounds and reinforcing weak points wherever we could. Every step was a calculation. A wrong move could get you bitten or shot. Then came the plan. We couldn't hold the base forever, but we could hit Harper where it hurt. Using what remained of our ammo, we set traps in the corridors he had likely used. When the infected surged again, we funneled them into kill zones, blasting them with controlled fire. Harper, in his arrogance, fell into one of the traps. I saw him pinned under a fallen steel beam, snarling, screaming. His eyes met mine, full of hatred and madness. You can't win!" I looked at him, at the madness consuming him, and finally understood. Survival wasn't just about killing the dead, it was about surviving the darkness in human hearts. I turned away, leaving him trapped as Daniels, and I reinforced the barricade. For a brief moment, the mess hall was quiet. The infected were pushed back, trapped outside by our reinforced defenses. Monroe surveyed the survivors. "We're not safe, but we've bought ourselves time. Time to regroup, to plan our next move." As I cleaned my rifle, I realized something chilling. Harper had been planning something else before the siege, something we had missed. In his fanaticism, he had prepared a contingency, an insider plan that went beyond just letting the infected in. And I had a gut feeling that whatever he had left behind, it wasn't just going to affect the base. The silence after the battle was deafening. Fort Grayson had become a shadow of its former self. Scorched walls, overturned vehicles, and the stench of blood and decay everywhere. Survivors huddled together, eyes wide, hands trembling. We had won temporary control, but the war wasn't over, and I had a sinking feeling that Harper's influence still lingered. I sat with Monroe and Daniels in what remained of the command center. Maps of the base were scattered on a table, markers and notes showing breached gates, barricades, and dead zones. Monroe rubbed his eyes, voice hoarse. "We've held out this long, but we can't last forever. Harper, he wasn't just helping them. He was planning to take the base entirely over." And I think he left something we haven't found yet. I frowned. What do you mean? Some kind of device? Explosives? Monroe shook his head. Worse. He experimented. He wasn't infected, but he was obsessed with control. I found his notes. He was trying to create a new kind of soldier, humans modified to resist the infection, to control the infected. And I think he succeeded in part. We haven't seen all of them. My stomach turned. You mean there could be more of them inside? Monroe nodded grimly. We need to find him and neutralize whatever he's left behind before the base falls completely. Daniels looked at me, pale and exhausted. Sergeant, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know. I put a hand on his shoulder. You can. We all can. But we have to move now. If we wait, we die or worse. We gathered what remaining ammunition we had and made our way through the maze of ruined corridors. Every shadow was a potential threat. Every sound, a scraping, a groan, set my nerves on edge. And then I saw them, figures, pale and fast, moving with a coordination that no normal human could manage. Harper's experiments. They spotted us immediately. I opened fire, Daniels covering my flank, but we realized quickly that bullets alone wouldn't stop them. They moved too quickly, too strategically. Fall back to the armory, I shouted. We'll funnel them in. We retreated, setting up barricades and using the remaining traps Harper had overlooked. The creatures funneled into narrow hallways, giving us a small advantage. Daniels fired with trembling hands, but I noticed him adjusting his aim with precision I taught him well. Finally, we cornered Harper in the central lab, his eyes wild with fury. Around him, cages held partially modified soldiers human, but twisted, controlled, and capable of extreme speed. He laughed, a chilling, hollow sound. You think you can stop evolution, Whitman? He spat. You've survived, yes, but only because you cling to the old ways. I've transcended. I raised my rifle. This isn't evolution. It's madness, and it ends here. He lunged, faster than I anticipated, knocking the rifle from my hands. Daniel screamed, firing his pistol, but Harper dodged with unnatural agility. I tackled him, wrestling him to the floor. It was a brutal struggle, a mixture of strength, desperation, and sheer will. Harper reached for a syringe on the table, a chemical agent meant to control the remaining modified soldiers, but I managed to knock it away. With a final surge, I slammed him into the floor, knocking him unconscious. The modified soldiers froze for a moment, confused. Daniels fired again, and we used that moment to barricade the lab, trapping them inside. I felt a grim satisfaction. Harper's plan was stopped for now. We gathered the remaining survivors. The base was in ruins, but the core perimeter still held. Supplies were low, but morale had shifted. We weren't just surviving, we were taking control. In the aftermath, I walked the base alone at dawn, rifle slung over my shoulder, eyes scanning the horizon. The forest was eerily quiet, broken only by distant moans. I wondered how many were left out there, and how many more Harper-style experiments might exist. Daniels came up beside me. Do you think we'll make it? He asked quietly. I looked at the rising sun, the sky turning pink and gold, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to hope. We survive, I said. One day at a time, that's all any of us can do. But deep down, I knew the truth. Harper's shadow was gone, but his work might not be. Somewhere out there, the seeds of his madness had been sown, and the fight, our fight, was far from over. As I looked over Fort Grayson, the ruined walls, the scorched fields, I realized this wasn't just a war against the dead. It was a war for humanity itself. And we had survived the first battle, But the war was only beginning.